So just to introduce you to Gert, Gert is Professor of European Forest Resources at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. He's a senior researcher at the University Environmental Research Unit. His background is in European scale forest resource analysis and climate change and the change of forest management. He has started to and co-develops a high-resolution forest resource model based on over 300,000 NFI plots. So Gert is going to focus mainly on the bioenergy side. Paddy will give a more broader range in terms of the overall bioenergy space.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here and giving the opportunity to say something about what we do in the IPCC. I've been IPCC coordinating lead author for the land use chapter several times, and but I will also try to translate that to what's going on in the European forests and give a projection of what that means for Irish forests as well. So I'll say something about the IPCC first, and then downscale that to Europe and the projection for Europe. Well, the IPCC, I'm sure you have seen those results in the media now and then. It's a group of nominated authors that are experts in a certain field, and they write an enormous literature review. That's how you can see it. And this is the cover page, what you see here of the land use chapter that I led. And basically, you write that with 15 authors from around the world. And those 15 have to cover forestry, agriculture, livestock, and all the ins and outs. And with land use, it's a very delicate sector because it immediately touches food issues, it immediately touches biodiversity issues. There's always a lot of attention on that chapter and the messages that come out of it. And that's a 3-4 year process where you write drafts and then reviewers from the countries review that, and you get, I think at one stage we had 2,735 comments on the chapter, and you have to go through that, and you have to address all these comments. And then in the end, after a long process, there is a summary of 40 pages. And that summary needs to be accepted by all the countries, 195 countries, in word by word. And they can also, the countries can also change that. So in that process, that summary is also changed in some way. But we as authors have to make sure that it's still in line with the contents of the report. And this is what it looks like unfortunately, in the COVID times in early 2022. Jim Skia from Scotland, he's the chair. He read the first sentence of that summary, the 40 pages, and then there were 60 hands from countries about that first sentence. And I thought that first sentence was a very general opening. So 4 hours later, we were still discussing that first sentence. And this is how it goes. But in the end, we got through the 40 pages. What does it then say? You know, carbon does not go away. We have emissions from fossil fuels on the left, 34 gigaton of carbon, but also land use changes. The real losses of forests are counted there as emissions. But the carbon has to go somewhere. And almost half of it stays in the atmosphere. This is the carbon, the CO2 concentration rise that we see in the atmosphere. About half of it stays in the atmosphere. A quarter is absorbed in the oceans, and a bit more than a quarter then has to go on the land. There's no other place where it can go. That's partly sequestered then in forests, agricultural soils, etc., etc. And it has to balance. What you have emissions and sinks, that has to balance. And that, certainly this, has driven a lot of, since the 90s already, a lot of research on can we improve this. We cannot do so much about this, we cannot do so much about this. So on the land, that is what we manage. Can we enhance that sink, and what can we do with land use measures? And in all the scenarios of the IPCC, and here Tom, I think, said you like numbers. Well, I have some numbers. This is the emissions, roughly 60 billion tons of CO2 globally from different sectors. Don't look at the details. And in all the emission, the reduction scenarios, these emissions have to come down. But you always have still emissions. There are fossil emissions that you cannot avoid. And these have to be compensated then always. In all the scenarios, the land is always important to compensate these residual emissions. The sinks are always in the negative one and the emissions in the positive. Now, more numbers. Don't look at the details here, that's not necessary. What we then finally come up with, what the IPCC says, in every sector, and that also makes it the climate problem so difficult. You have 195 countries, but you also have 6, 7, 8 different sectors. And in every sector you can take a number of measures. You already heard in the introductory talks, even in Ireland, in this bioenergy field, there's a lot of different measures what you can do and what is in development. So in every sector and every measure, you can only achieve a little bit. And this one. The land use sector is here, and the land use sector stands out with, this is the bigger the bar, the more sequestration. In the land use sector you can achieve a lot, but it's costly. The red means it's a pretty costly measure. In other sectors, for example, wind and solar, you can achieve a lot, but also with I'm already losing the pointer almost up there. It's rather cheap, these measures. But bioenergy is there in the IPCC. I must say, over the reports of the IPCC, the role of bioenergy has come down with all the, especially because of all the worries about sometimes very dramatic scenarios that we could afforest with 1 billion hectares. We could afforest, 1/4 of the world and produce a lot of bioenergy. That sort of scenarios have been criticized heavily because that would lead to food insecurity. It would lead to detrimental effects on biodiversity. It has been criticized a lot, and it's these extreme scenarios that have also led to a lot of criticism on the bioenergy part. But bioenergy is there. Enhanced use of wood products is here. Of course, that has an impact on bioenergy. The biofuels is there with a certain achievement, and the bioelectricity is also there. So it is there, but with a more critical message. So land is incredibly important. It's difficult to monitor, difficult to see what is going on and what can be achieved. And as I said, it's more and more criticized as well because of the trade-offs with food and biodiversity. And challenging for the land sector is also that you're dealing with hundreds of millions of landowners. And they're all different. It's not like if you have a big energy supplying company here in Ireland, you may be dealing with a few companies. That's different than dealing with landowners. A little bit about European forests. Also in European forests, since, the 1950s, it's a story very much of more forests. Also in Ireland, there has been a lot of afforestation in the 90s. Your forest area has expanded significantly. That has also taken place in many countries in Europe, leading to that the growth has increased a lot. So there's more and more growth of wood every year, now close to 800 million cubic meters. The felling's a bit stable, so what you're harvesting, and you're building up this difference as a carbon sink in your forest. But we already saw then that the growth was starting to decline. There were some early signs that something was changing. And the pressure on the system is also increasing. This is the harvest statistics in Europe since 1998. You can clearly see the dip there in the economic recession times, the financial crisis, but that picks up quickly again and the harvest increases again, now close to 500 million cubic meters. And that's the average for Europe, but it also means that in some regions your harvest is already at its maximum. You're getting close to what you're growing in your forest, and that balance in forestry is very important. So the paradigm that there is ever more forest and wood available, this is changing. We are reaching that limit in Europe. Also partly because of more natural disturbances, biodiversity issues again, and that changes our view on resources. I'll give you a short example how fast that is changing. This is Norway spruce. Every tree has its growth area. Certain trees like to grow in the boreal, other trees like to grow in the Mediterranean. Norway spruce is also a species of the boreal and of the higher latitudes. And just look at the reddish part. This is where it would grow currently. Just only look at that, and in the Alps. This is its natural distribution. And then we projected that, and it moves on in time, 2010, 2040, and 2070 under a tough climate scenario. We would say, well, it can only survive in the high north in 2070. And we said, well, okay, this is a climate scenario, it's a tough scenario, and it's 2070. This is not, it's not happening now. But the actuality is that this spruce mortality and the shifting of species going much faster than we thought. This is a view I'm sure you will know from mid-Germany. All the brownish is dying spruce in the Harz. This is also happening in Austria, Czech, Slovak, Poland. This is happening massively. So these changes of the climate and the impact it has on the resource are much faster than we thought. So our view on Europe having more and more forests is, I think, is drastically changing. And that results, of course, also in a carbon balance. This is Czech Republic. Doing fine on the time, I guess. You know, countries have to report their greenhouse gas balance to the UN. And part of that is the forestry balance. This is what Czech was reporting to the UN as a sink. Minus is again a sink, minus 8 million tons of CO2. So it's growing more than what you're harvesting. This is what they were projecting. Then we, with our models, we could project that forest resource, and we said, you know, this spruce is vulnerable, you need to change it to different species. And if you change that, you take such a resource through a conversion. And when you take it through a conversion, you most likely lose carbon temporarily. And that's the yellow line. We say, okay, you have a small source there, but once these new trees start to grow, you get your sink again. I'm sure you're not all foresters, but hope you get that. This is what we thought. Again, our models. But this happened in reality. The spruce mortality went so fast that Czech is now reporting a source of 15 million tons of CO2. It's a total new paradigm of European forests. That these forests are changing, rapidly changing. So now we have a source all of a sudden. And our projection was not, well, our models are not always that good. But, well, they're good, but things go different than what we thought would happen. Yeah? You all look a bit worried. Right. Now, we're going more local, Ireland. And I want to thank Andrew McCullough, who is in the room somewhere, for supplying the NFI data of Ireland for our model projection. I'm sure you know 700,000 hectares of forest, roughly 10% of your area, a lot of young Sitka forest, never planted to be a very beautiful forest, but planted to produce wood. Yeah, I don't need to explain that. Irish harvest, very quickly, same type of graph. Because you planted a lot of Sitka in the 90s, this is coming into an age now where the wood is becoming available. And so your harvest is going up, roughly 4 million cubic meters of wood. Chunks of, well, there's bigger diameters coming, so more saw logs coming available. And this also means that if you increase your harvest, this also means that you have more residues coming available. These pre-commercial thinnings from the previous photo, sawing losses, low quality woods. This would mean that, well, out of the 4 million cubic meters, well, certainly 1.5 million cubic meters is in this low quality range, saw logging range. So that is in principle would be available for low quality, so bioenergy application. A little bit about the Irish greenhouse gas balance. Who has never seen anything like this? Oh, good. Oh, good. Then I don't need to explain too much. The sink is again negative. This is your forest sink here over time. But in Ireland, so this is your land use sector, including agricultural soil and including all these drained peatland soils, and Eugene here has probably made part of these numbers. Well, you have emissions here as well. The legend is not here, but I think the blue was the drained peatland, to the losses of carbon from draining peat is here. So the total net is that your land use sector is a source. You have some sinks in the forest, like pointer there, but the sink is also getting less. Your forests are aging, you're harvesting a bit more, so your sinks are also getting less. It's good to when you make a projection, it's good to look at this past development and see what will happen. And then we made projections, thanks to Andrew and John. One simple projection is you keep investing in Sitka and maintain your Sitka, maybe have a little bit more Sitka, but certainly maintain that. Also harvest a bit more is scenario 1. And 2 is, well, we do not only have renewable energy directives, we also have a nature restoration law since recently. And that's what countries have to implement as well. And we, in a theoretical form, I want to emphasize this is in a bit theoretical scenario, we implemented the restoration. So we changed part of the Sitka. Once it's harvested, we change that to, for example, oak or alder or willow or birch, and we re-wet some of the drained peatlands. That is a restoration scenario. What does that mean? Yeah, this is how you afforested over the time, with more private afforestations more recently. What does it mean? In the Sitka, you maintain your growing stock, you develop it even a bit further, let it gradually and make a certain amount of wood available. Your growing stock keeps going up. But in the restoration, then you take your forest through a conversion. And that always means you lose something temporarily. So your growing stock goes down until about 2040. And then it's these slower growing species, alder, oak, etc., they start growing then. And only then you start building up your growing stock again with a different forest. For your increment, it looks like this. Your growth, your increment in the Sitka, it's also your, yeah, good, I'll manage that. Your increment goes down gradually because your Sitka is aging a bit. You get a bit more older Sitka. But in the restoration, oak and alder and such, they grow slower. So your increment goes down. You know, if you need to do nature restoration, you cannot have the most optimal and the most maximum wood production. It's a trade-off there. This is what it shows and what we can quantify. Same for the fellings. In a restoration, you're changing your system, so you make more wood available in the beginning. But if you, that pointer is gone. Well, you see the orange peak. If you have a high fellings in the beginning for the restoration, it means you have less in the future. Very simple, but it's quantified in this way. Right? Good. More numbers. But this is one of the last ones, I'll promise. This is one that needs a bit of explanation. In the left is the situation in 2020. The right is 2100. And this is how per species, in which diameter classes you have your forest. But it's in a relative distribution. So you have a lot of young Sitka here. This is Sitka in 30, 40 centimeter trees. That is what the message on the left. You have a lot of young Sitka here. In 2100, with our model projection, we can show, and if you maintain the Sitka and do not harvest too much, you will have a lot of older Sitka. We're not invested. We also have a bit of a change of tree species. But you see that the green part has shifted a lot to the right. You have a lot of Sitkas of 60, 70, 80 centimeters width if you don't increase your harvest at the same time. In the restoration, this looks quite a bit different. You're losing most of your Sitka, and you get a lot of these broad-leaved, older oak here in the dark red, birch in the orange, in the pinkish colors and the orange color. So you change your resource. And that is, of course, well, if it's a bit of a theoretical if this is possible on the drained peatlands, but it's one way. And we are in contact also with John Redmond and Andrew about this is a draft run. That's what I want to emphasize, and this we want to improve this much further. And then you see how your resources are changing over time. It really runs on the NOI plots. And that's where I end this. Coming back to Ireland, this balancing act of resources, investing, biodiversity, nature, that is, I think, one of the messages that I want to give. Bioenergy is certainly there. There will be a lot of resources on low quality available, but also risky to continue with the one species, Sitka, and you're still losing soil carbon, which is well, probably not what you want. And the more, we call this climate smart forestry. The term that we launched in 2015 is looking at all these aspects of forestry. Thanks a lot. I want to thank my team, a lot of people behind these runs. It's certainly good to acknowledge that, and thank Andrew and John for the input data. And I want to welcome you to Overloon, where we live, and come and enjoy mountain biking in the forest there.
Thank you very much, Jan, for that. I mean, it's the carbon sink that we have within forestry and how we manage our carbon resources is a critical discussion topic at this point in time, and something that is going to become more and more prevalent.